All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Coach Reese and Coach Loretta with Ornery Mule Racing. We're here sipping our coffee, our beverage of choice. Coming back after a nice little break with the holiday season. So, welcome back, everybody, from Thanksgiving. Welcome to the Christmas season. Hope everybody's planning on getting their trees and ornaments and decorations all set up. I'm pretty excited about our topic today, and I know Loretta is. This was your idea, and I think it's a fantastic thing to think about this time of the year, just as we start planning our 2024s. And that is the topic of the transition season. So most of us are going to be finishing up most of our A races, probably within the past couple months or so. And we're kind of in this middle ground between we're not really in a hard racing season, but, some of our events in June and in May of next year are a little bit too far away to really start getting into the nitty gritty details about. So it's kind of this in between time where, well, what the heck do we do? Do we just kick back? Do we do nothing? Do we train really hard? What's happening with transition seasons? So with that, Loretta, welcome. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing pretty great. Thanks for that great introduction because I am excited about this. This time of the year is exciting for me because we get to reflect on what's happened over the last racing season and then start thinking about, okay, what are my challenges? What are my strengths and weaknesses? Where do I put those into play? And then how do I plan out my season for the upcoming year?
Yep, that's right. And this is coffee with coaches. Maybe this is a little bit too detailed, a little bit too nitty gritty for a lot of people. But this is a great way to kind of get introduced to how coaches are actually thinking about what they're planning for your seasons. I have a lot of athletes that I work with who, I tell them like, hey, we're in this season. These are the workouts that we're doing. This is why we're doing it. But for the next hour, we're going to be really just diving deep into this transition season. So hopefully it's not too technical for people, but we do want to start off with some definitions and just wrapping back and forth on like what the heck is transition season? Where is it? What are these bigger seasons when we're talking about the overall periodized training paradigm? So Loretta, do you want to give us a rundown of what we're talking about?
Sure. So first, I just want to clarify that transition season may happen at a different point for different people, depending on what their race schedule is. So many of us, because a lot of us live in the Midwest, are kind of in that transition season. We're coming off of some big fall races. And so we're taking this time. So the way I describe it is, so let's say we're coming off a race. First, we have this big racing season, right? Then we move on to recovery. So recovery is that what I look at is a couple weeks that we have a little bit more downtime where we're letting our bodies heal, recover mentally, physically, endocrine system getting back into place, all of those important pieces as we come off a big A race that we've really pushed ourselves. So during that time, for me, I like to have athletes have a little bit of flexibility because we've been working so hard all year on focusing on following a training plan and doing all these specific things. And now I have a couple of weeks to where I can kind of relax, let my body heal, doing some light cross training, light walking, but not rushing back into things. I mean, I think that recovery is, each season is really important, but recovery is really important to make sure that we're really adhering to some of that and not making ourselves and pushing ourselves back out into a running training plan too quickly. Because what I find is when we do that, we haven't let our bodies heal as much as it needs to. And then those little niggles start popping up. So that's where I put recovery. And then following recovery, then we go into this transition season. So we don't have a race, let's say until spring. So now we're going to take this time, however much time that we may have. I think it varies per athlete. It could be 4 weeks, it could be 6 months. I mean, it just depends on when the next racing season is coming up for them. So this is the time to really think about what are those process goals that I've been, not working on? Do I need to work on eating? Do I need to work on sleeping? Is it strength training that I need? Is my focus going to be speed over transition and lowering the volume? Where are my weaknesses? And then really thinking about that so you can really focus on that during that time. It's just like, it's kind of, to me, transition season is a little bit of a gift because I'm not tied to very, very specific training where I'm having these rigid targets right now. Now I'm focusing on the things the missing pieces maybe that I needed all season, but I just didn't have in place as much as I'd like to. And I learned that after going through my racing season and going, okay, this is something that I need to work on. So I think it's a good time, for reflection. So that's what I really love about transition. For me as a coach, many of my athletes, I think a lot of runners really sort of lack on making sure we're getting strength training in. So it's a really beautiful time to start working on some general strength, building up, being able to potentially do some heavier strength, or if you're already in a great strength regimen, it's a great time for you to sort of shift gears and really focus on that heavy strength. Because yes, even runners need to have heavy strength. We're running on one leg or the other all the time. So we need to have asymmetry and we need to be strong to be able to go. So that was what my thoughts are on recovery and transition.
Perfect. Okay, so just to summarize again, we have these macro cycles, or the biggest cycles that we have during the year, the biggest bucket of how we start to, organize our entire years for our athletes. And we have the racing season, which is gonna, be the one of the bigger buckets that's gonna incorporate your base mileage, your build mileage, your specific mileage up for different key races. And then you have your recovery, which is in itself, we like to call it a season. For recovery for people can last from 1 to 4 weeks. So it definitely warrants its own type of distinction in the training paradigm. And then after that, we have that transition, then leading into the next racing block where we're building, we're laying down some base mileage and then getting specific. So I like that. We're going to focus more on these large macro cycles. So the macro cycle of transition season. And like you detailed, it's definitely a little bit more flexible. And the way that I think about it is it's almost a bridge between your last racing season and then where you're going to go for your next racing season. So it's this in between ground where, like you said, we're not going to be super stringent on key workouts for key races, or really making sure that we're getting super nitty gritty into our long runs, our workouts, and how they directly relate to particular races. But this transition season is a little bit more loose. It's a little bit more free flowing, a chance to take opportunities and a chance to take chances with your training, so that way you can work on those weak links, because we all know we have them. I have my own weak links I'm working on in transition season right now, and I'm sure that you do too, Loretta. And this is the perfect opportunity because you try a couple workouts, you take a couple risks in your training as far as things that you've never done before. Maybe somebody has never done strength training. Maybe somebody has never done repeat 200s or 400s or faster work. But our next goal events are still so far off in the distance that we're not in immediate threat of particularly jeopardizing an event that's coming up in the future. So I do love that distinction of the transition season that you made. And I think too, well, where the heck is the off season, Loretta? Do you want to describe what we?
Yeah, I was going to say that, so what I like to refer to it as a transition season. Some people call it off season, but I think off season, that word is sort of a slippery slope. So does that mean I sit around and binge Netflix, for the next few weeks and do nothing? Or do I usually use it as a purpose? And I came across an Instagram post by Jason Fitzgerald, and I think this really sums it up pretty well. It says, if you need to get back into shape after an off season, you're doing it wrong. Swings in training volume peak or spike your injury risk, and the opportunity cost of getting back into shape derails your ability to have a great season. So instead of off season, think preseason. So I think, preseason, transition season is a really great way to think about it, because it's really getting you ready for the season, and it's fun for me because I get to have a little more flexibility with the athletes. I think people kind of enjoy this because they've been working hard all year round. I really think this is an important time to have a coach. Sometimes I think people think opposite, like, oh, I'm not training for a race, so I don't need a coach. But this time is really kind of the nitty gritty where we can get some of that. If you want to use a reference, build the house, we're really rebuilding that house, right? Layer by layer to get you ready for that race.
Yep. And just like how every cross country coach tells their athletes, hey, you need to be putting in the work during the summer, because by the time I get my hands on you during the fall, like the groundwork should already be there. Like this transition season is the time for us to lay down our groundwork for our next upcoming season, working on those weak links, keeping on those strengths, just to keep them in maintenance mode. I guess when we think about the overarching transition paradigm, do you have a rough guideline as to what type of mileage you like to see your athletes at, maybe as a percentage of what they were at during their racing season?
That's a good question, because I'm glad you went with percentage, because everybody's a little bit different on what they're training for or what their distances that they're currently doing or volume. So I would say I would reduce to maybe about 75%, somewhere in there is where the reduction it probably is, if I had to guess off the top of my head. How about you?
I love that. I personally think about it as what type of mileage have my athletes built up to being able to routinely tolerate, right? Like, in my head, I think about my athletes like, hey, this guy operates and he's been operating at 30 to 40 miles per week, or she has been operating from 50 to 60 miles a week. And we know that that is routine for her during her season, or during his season. So maybe we'll take about like 70% of that routine number, right? Of course, when we're building up for races, we might spike that number up. Maybe somebody who's typically between like 30 to 40 miles, a couple weeks during the year, they'll be at like 60 or 70 and then come back down, float back down to their typical base mileage. So I don't necessarily count those like extreme spikes in mileage as part of this reduction. I try to think about what typically doing, what is normal for them, and then reducing to 70%. Reason for that is because 70% is still a good amount of running for anybody. I mean, 70% of, 40 miles is going to be, oh my gosh, okay, this is going to test my math. Maybe about like still like 30 miles of training.
Yeah.
So still a good number. You're still getting out there, but it just builds in this extra little space with which we can then take chances, like we were talking before, on increasing strength training, or maybe that builds in a little bit of space so that way your body can recover from something that might be a little bit more high intensity if you spent most of your season doing longer, easier distance type of events. Maybe extra little time in your schedule so that way you can do some foam rolling. Or maybe it just builds in extra time, like you mentioned before, to sleep, because we need that for recovery, right? So it's almost like putting your running in a maintenance type of volume mileage. So that way you can then kind of play around with the other variables like intensity or other modalities of exercise.
Yeah. And I think that, I have athletes that during this transition season like to maybe, oh, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on my trainer. And so maybe I'm going to not do quite as much running, but I'm going to still be getting in that aerobic exercise. So, I'm looking at overall time versus mileage, for some of those people. Some people, who have been running 5 or 6 days a week may decide they want to take one more rest day, or maybe they're using that in a different cross training way. And I think that some people, need that just for part about is psychological, because they've been working so hard that they need a little bit of more free time, I would say, than, just dedicating it to the sport. Because let's face it, most of us are not pro athletes. It's not our job. So, we have to have a little bit of flexibility too. And I think the nice thing about transition season is often for most people is falling around the time of the holidays. So it makes you have a little bit more of a flexibility to enjoy that time as well. So I think that that's a piece that you can be flexible with yourself and allow yourself a little bit of room there.
I love that psychology piece. Scaling back a little bit on time that we commit into our training. We're not going to be jeopardizing gains for next year, right? Because this transition season is about making sure we're in maintenance mode, and we're almost having like a preseason for when we start to build and introduce more time or more workouts that are going to be really the bread and butter of your next racing schedule. But taking away that psychological piece of like not having to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get your 10 miles in, or not having to like hit X amount of mileage for the week, but just kind of being able to sit back, take a breather, take a turkey day if you need it, or take 2 or 3 days off during Christmas so that way you can get your gifts, wrap your gifts, and then open them up with your family. Whatever it might be, it takes a little bit of stress off of hitting particular numbers, but still like we're not in this like period of complete nothing. You know what I mean? So like maintenance is really, I mean, once you build your body to a certain physiology, it doesn't take a heck of a lot to maintain that. So if we take a month, if we take 2 months, and we're in this transition period, you're not going to lose a lot of fitness. I mean, we might get a little bit rusty at the very high end of things if maybe you're going into the transition season a little bit injured and you need to introduce more cross training as recovery instead of running. So maybe we lose a little bit at that top end, but other than that, like give it a week or two back in your season, and it comes back really quick. So it's kind of this way to scale back, kind of conserve a little bit of energy so that way you can recover your body, you can recover your mindset, and really start that next racing season with all your cylinders firing.
Right. I think it's interesting, I have athletes in transition state season still making some great gains, right? Partly we're having a little bit more recovery, we're getting more sleep, maybe we're getting better nutrition. So that's, contributing to us making gains because, our body is able to recover and heal and get stronger. And then those athletes are also doing some heavy strength regimens. And, I have some that are, 4 to 6 weeks in, because their season, transition season began closer to maybe mid-October, so they've been a little bit of time and they're starting to see those adaptations already in their training, getting faster from the strength training, which is exciting too to watch. So it doesn't mean there's no gains during transition season either, right? You're still going to be making improvements, but the real I guess prize will be when you start to build for your race and actually get into your next race and actually get to see like how much have you improved. You can look on a day-to-day basis like, oh wow, my heart rate is, and my rate of perceived exertion is low and I'm starting to run a little bit faster already, during some of this transition season. But wait until you start sprinkling in that speed and that tempo and, the more specific things as you're building to your race. That will be exciting to watch. So transition season is getting you ready for that excitement.
Exactly. And I think, this bridge of a transition season, it's to link up where you left off during your last racing season and where you plan to start your next racing season, right? So like we've been pretty ambiguous with exactly what this actual transition season is because again, it depends on every athlete. Like that's our best go-to answer is it depends, right? But let's say you have an athlete who's coming off of a racing season, they're not injured. Now we have like a month where, okay, well, December, we're gonna, be in this transition, kind of build some time into the holidays. But then January 1st, what if that athlete wants to start doing higher intensity things? Maybe they're building into some like 10Ks or half marathons in March to prepare for their longer races coming up in the summer of 2024. What types of things would you be having that athlete do during their transition season?
They're starting to build to the next set. Next,
Yeah.
is that what you're saying?
Yep. So you have an athlete coming off of their races, maybe just finished a 150 miler. They took their recovery that's needed. They're in this season and they're building up to getting back into, let's say, like half marathon shape.
Okay.
And
Yeah. So I like to throw in things that are a little less structured, I guess. So thinking about things like fartleks, so you can kind of go out, you can have a run, but not feel like you're pressured at a certain point to really do something. You're just like, okay, I'm going to go for this run and I'm going to throw in a little bit of speed. So I'm going to see how fast I can get to that next mailbox or to that tree. And then I'm going to recover. And then I'm going to throw in a few more as I go along, or I'm going to enjoy a nice hilly route today. And some of those hills, I'm going to run hard up and then I'm going to run down easy. I just kind of playing around with a little bit of speed play, but not feeling trapped into, I have to hit this time or this target every time or this distance, kind of letting that go a little bit. I like to, so strides and fartleks, I think are a good piece to start building as you're going through.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that fartlek idea because it does take a lot of pressure off of like, oh, I'm not locked into like, like a 15-minute tempo, or I'm not locked into like a 3-minute like VO2 max type of interval or things like that. But as we go out day to day, we can say like, okay, do a fartlek where, like you do a couple intervals where you're sprinting off pretty hard, and try to get your legs back underneath you and just have fun with it. Like I think this is the time to really have like rediscover what is fun for you in training, right? Like I had a great time earlier this year doing a lot of the longer and easier distance type of things, building up for ultra marathons. And now as I go outside on my lunch runs, I'm thinking to myself like, oh man, it is pretty fun, like just spending 30 seconds and hitting this hill pretty hard and then having a nice easy recovery and then just letting the next hill repeat come to me whenever it does, whenever I'm like, yeah, like I'm hungry for another one. And just do that periodically throughout a run so that you increase your power output, you increase the speed that your legs are working, but you increase the amount of fun that you're having, So, but incorporating some of those speedier things, if you're then going to be starting like a speedier block come January, that's that kind of bridge that we're talking about. So like maybe in January, you start your half marathon season where you're doing mainly base building, but you're going to start to pepper in a couple tempo miles. Well, maybe if you just came off of an ultra marathon season, like maybe it's been a while since you've done an actual tempo run. So it's pretty jarring to the body to like not do a tempo run and then all of a sudden come January be building some mileage, incorporating some tempo runs. So maybe this transition season is when you build that bridge into like, okay, we're not going to do a full out tempo run, but maybe we do like, some fartlicks, or maybe we do some like, maybe I do 3 or 4 rounds of like 4 to 5 minute tempo runs where I'm just, starting to get reconnected with what that leg turnover feels like, what that breathing feels like, without these like super hard parameters of like hitting X mileage, hitting X, X pace, and just let it come naturally to your body. And I think transition season is a great opportunity to get in touch or reconnected with your rate of perceived exertion,
Right. Yep. Yep. Another thing, so I think I like how you talked about, it can be different for everyone. So I have a particular athlete that's really working too on, she lost touch of being able to get into the uncomfortable zone. So we're playing around with that a little bit in the transition season. And we are doing some of those timed tempo runs just so it gives her a chance to push that on, into that uncomfortable and out of the easy comfortable all the time, so I think it's a good opportunity to play around with those kind of things too. So you have that opportunity where you're not so intensely focused, not doing really big long runs, but you can go out there and go out and just run and see how it feels, that little bit faster pace.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of your athlete, thinking about her weaknesses as a runner. Like, what was she lacking during that season? Was she lacking that, being able to go into the well, or whatever it was? And this is a great time to be working on that. It kind of reminds me of, me reflecting on my season and where I'm going is, like things that I'm really going to work on for 2024 are durability and increase my like top end speed. Because I noticed that like my 5K and my 10K paces are like super close together, and I just don't have that extra high end gear to like go faster at those harder intensities. So me thinking, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to spend like 2 to 3 weeks, and 1 day a week, I'm going to work on like hard 200s or like hard 400s. Probably haven't done that in like 8 months. You know what I mean? Like it was probably since like spring of 2023 when I was actually working on that stuff. So anything that you don't keep up with, especially for a period of months, is probably going to slip away a little bit from you. Not like super drastically, but of course, those are always gains that we can come back to. Like a novel stimulus, and your body is going to give it something to react to and get better from. As far as durability, just thinking for myself in this transition season, like I am not doing so many like 10 and 15 mile runs during the week. I'm saving that mileage, and maybe I do a little bit longer run on the weekends. So I have one day where I work on some speed, and then one day where I actually work on just like, hey, let's be out in the woods for like 4 or 5 hours, be eating, be moving, be having fun, things like that. Because that's something that I was missing. That's going to help build me into January, February, March, where I'm going to be increasing my long run distances, and whatnot.
Right.
Some athletes that are going to be working on weight management and weight reduction during their transition season. And for those athletes, they've identified that like, hey, like I've been making really good gains. I have some extra pounds to lose, and that's going to be the make or break of my next season. So what we talked about is, hey, let's get you in contact with a nutritionalist. Let's talk with somebody with a registered dietitian that we have at OMR. Let's get their intake. Let's get their nutritional and expertise input, so that way we can work back and forth and say like, okay, these are the type of workouts that are going to be good for you and not overextend your body when you're already in a weight reduction type of phase in your year. So that way, once he does start to train a little bit harder, he's more structured for it, a little bit lighter on his feet, and doing so in a well-balanced way that's not going to negatively influence his quality of life or his energy levels during the day.
And I love that, working with we have 2 dietitians, Kylie and Nicole, and they're really great about working with people that do want to work on some body composition, but this is the time of the year to do it. It's not really ideal during racing season to work on body composition because, you're working so hard, you're in your high mileage, you have a lot of volume, you have a lot of intensity, and you need to fuel yourself for that, right? So if there's a time, and if that's something that you really want to work on, body composition is is during transition season, right? That's probably the safest, healthiest time to do it. But working through it with a dietitian, I think is really smart, because you're still an athlete and you still need to fill your athlete plate in the way to fuel your body, but you just need to be smart in the reductions that you're making, to not go too far, because then it ends up backfiring on us, right? So I think that's really so helpful. And opposite of that, I have some people that are working on their nutrition because they're not taking in enough calories. And so now they're also meeting with some of our dietitians to work on that, because they have big goals for 2024 and they know that they're not doing a good job of fueling their body to be able to obtain those goals, right? So I think that both reasons are really good reasons to reach out to dietitians. This time of the year is a really good time, because it gives you a little bit more time to make that part of your daily routine, when you're not in the thick of hard training.
Exactly. And, for athletes like that, depending on what type of body composition they're going for or what their goal is for poundage reduction over a given period of time, maybe that transition season lasts a month, maybe it lasts 2, maybe it lasts 3 months. This particular athlete that I'm working with, we're probably going to be in a transition phase for at least a good 2 to 3 months. We're not increasing so much fatigue on the body when it's already in a slight caloric deficit. And just like you said too, I love that idea of, hey, like workouts are a stress, and so is working on your nutritional strategy, right? Whether it's actual physical stress or mental stress, because as we all know, like rehabitualizing our eating patterns is a mental stress. So if that is weighing on your mind, if work is weighing on your mind, if the family is weighing on your mind, and now you have like your workouts that you have to get done or your eating strategy that you're trying to figure out, that's just a lot of stress to be put in the bucket, whether it actually impacts you physically or not. And a lot of times that mental fatigue that you can get from just now having this extra thing to think about can be notable for sure. So that's one of those things too, where, just like you said, like it's really hard to increase your training, increase your workout intensity, be preparing for these big goals, and then also be really focused on reducing weight. It's a lot for somebody to do. So that's the perfect season to do it. And of course, we don't want to take like a 2 or 3 week or a 3 month off season, right? Like we don't want to take off as athletes. I mean, if we're athletes and we're out there and we're ultra running, like we want to be out there, we want to get outside. We want to enjoy these cool places. So not thinking about it as like, oh, this is just going to be 3 month wash of not doing any running training. No, this is the time to be chipping on your weak links, and maybe for some people, decreasing some pounds healthfully and with assured guidance is the weak link.
So I think the other thing to think about during transition season is planning for your 2024 season and beyond, right? So this is a good time where I like to give athletes a little bit of time after that recovery period before we actually start thinking about races again. You just came off a big hard race and you need a little bit of mental break and not going on to the next race. Let's give it a little couple weeks and then we start thinking about that, right? So for me, I like to have athletes tell me like what races are drawing you, like what do you really want to do, and let's put that sort of into a schedule. I like to lay it out visually, so there's the entire race season is sort of plotted out so they can kind of see where they fall in. And I think personally, I think 1 to 2 A races a year, it seems like a good achievable amount to really be able to get the full effort that you want and give yourself time to recover. And then, I have athletes that also like to sprinkle in some, let's say, B races. So B races would be those races that are building you to your A race. So maybe you're going out there and you're treating it as a training race where you're trying the strategies that you're planning for your A race ahead of time. I think especially when we're doing the longer efforts, the ultra marathon efforts, we need to have some people need those to be able to practice their fueling strategies, because our long runs aren't getting us to that maybe point that we need to practice a little bit more. You might be going on, let's say, a maximum of a 5-hour long run, but your race is going to be 30 hours. So, maybe doing a little bit longer effort, where you're getting into that 8-hour range or something, or around there, is going to give you a little bit more time than that 5-hour, right? To really test some of your fueling, your any of your equipment, that kind of stuff. So that's what I think about when we're thinking about B races. And then another school of thought is the C race, right? So those are races that are in your training plan, but they're not meant as a race, right? You might be using it as your tempo run that week. You might be using it as your VO2 max all out. I'm going to go run a mile race or a 5K race. You might be using it for those efforts. But those are built in. And so what I like to think, or I like to have athletes think about, is when I'm putting these B and C races in, how do they complement my A race, and what's my purpose to get me to my end goal?
Yes, that is fantastic. If we're going to be racing like 100Ks to 100-mile distances, I firmly believe that like we have peak performance at maybe two of those per year, right? So let's just take into context, like most of us are going to be wanting to build up to and race 100 miles. Maybe you have a June race and then you have an October race. Shout out to Kettle Moraine 100 and Hennepin 100. Maybe those are your two 100-mile races for the year. Those would be your goals. Like everything else is building up to that, right? So your B races might be a couple months out from that. Maybe you're running Galena before Kettle and using that as a good training race for Kettle to figure out your nutritional strategy. In particular, like shout out to Galena because that course has a very similar elevation profile to Kettle, and it's actually a little bit more than. So if you can, last 8 hours on that course at your Kettle Moraine 100-mile like plan, then hey, that's a great B race because now it's giving you live info about like how did you feel at the end of the race? Did you feel like you could keep going? Do you feel like you could keep that up for another X amount of time for Kettle? It's rarely ever do I prescribe 8-hour training runs for people, let alone hard to just get out there. And if you're doing it on your own, be solo for 8 hours, even if you're using your car as an aid station, like it's nice to have a lot of people there, make a weekend of it, things like that. But maybe in March, you want to run a 10K or you want to run like a half marathon or something like that. Maybe that's your C race because C races don't necessarily they don't necessarily help our A races by any means. And they're still so far out that I just consider them the fun money, like what types of races you just want to go to because you want to run that race. Maybe in training, we don't necessarily build up for that. Maybe we don't like structure like a periodized block for that one race, but that doesn't mean that you can't go out and do it. It just means that like, hey, given what type of race it is, how are we going to structure your other workouts accordingly? So that way you get a little bump in fitness for your next B event that is then going to impact your A event,
Yeah.
And plus, like,
How'd you get that bubble? How did you get that thumbs up coming in your screen?
on my screen, I don't know. I just went like
There was a
this.
thumbs up that just popped up. I don't know either.
No, but dude, I just lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
Transition. No.
It was a big bubble thumb, and I'm like, wow, he's magic. It came right out.
No. Us wrapping on, like how we structure our athletes. Oh, we have plenty of athletes who like they'll give us like a week's notice of like, hey, I want to run this race, or like maybe even a month or 2 months notice, like I want to run this race, and it's like, maybe it's a trail 10K in January when your next A event is Potawatomi in April. It's like, yeah, like go out, do it, have fun, but like we don't have enough time to like dedicate this block for that race. So we're just going to keep training through it and use it as just like a stimulus and know that, hey, we might have a little bit of recovery at the end. Maybe we don't taper super well going into it. But we want to run it because we don't like to tell our athletes no, right? Like if it can potentially work with your plan, for sure. Because I don't want this to be like I don't want people to feel like they have to sacrifice for one race a year.
Right. I think what I like though is when you're thinking about the B races and the C races, is going in with a little bit different expectations than the A race, right? The A race is that all out effort, the one that you really want, right? You really want to have your best effort, whether it's a PR or whatever that is, you want that. But we have to reframe our mindset when we're thinking about the B and the C races. Those aren't races where I would go in expecting a really great finish or a PR. I mean, they may happen just because your fitness has improved, but it's not the end of the world if that's not what happens at those races, because those races we're not tapering you for, we're not building you for. We're kind of you're kind of racing through those races to get to your A race.
Yes, I love that expectation reframing. And I think that's the hardest part about loading up your calendar with races that you're not necessarily going to do hard. Because especially in ultra running, like if you go out and you do a 5K and you're like, oops, I did it way too hard, a day or two of recovery, if you're not injured, like you're back up to training. But if you sign up for a 50K or a 50 mile and you tell yourself, oh, I'm not going to do it that hard, it's just going to be a fun training race. And then all of a sudden, like maybe you do the entire distance and it is easy, but you still put 50 miles of work on your body, whether it's hard or whether it's easy, you know? So um, even if our expectations are that we're not going to do it that hard, maybe it is a hard stimulus on your body that now we need to take extended recovery for. Or maybe you get into the race, you start the race thinking like, oh yeah, I'm going to take this really easy. You find yourself like, you know, maybe top 10 and you're like, oh man, like I could close this off pretty hard. And now you get that competitive drive, right? Because a lot of us ultra runners are competitors with ourselves, with other people. You know, so it is hard to keep honest with yourself about, hey, what is your actual effort? And that's where sometimes it's hard to say, like, I'm going to sign up for this on Ultra Sign Up and it's going to affect my score, but I'm not going to race it as hard as I know I can and come in 30th instead of in 10th or whatever it is. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
you got to make a pact with yourself that, like, hey, this is because we're working towards a bigger goal, you
Right,
know?
right. I love that because that darn ultra sign up gets us right with that ranking and and you know where we are on that. But you have to be able to put that aside if you're going to use and do B and C races if you have big A race goals, right? And I think that what we have to think about is, especially when we're getting into the ultra marathon distance, is even if we're using it as a B or a C race, like you said, we're still breaking ourselves down, right? There's that fine line between risk and reward. So when we're getting into those 8, 10, 12-hour races, we're really breaking ourselves down. So all of that time that we've been spent building, now we've got to recover and we've got to start that in a sense, a rebuild, right? Because we broke ourselves down, even though it wasn't our A race, even though it was a B or a C race, we're still taxing our body. You know, we start thinking as ultra runners, it's just a 50-mile race. Well, a 50-mile race is a lot on your body.
Yeah. And that's when, too, like, even if you're considering B races, like, I still want my athletes to do something that if it is a B race and you're not going to race it hard, it still needs to be something that you're super stoked on, right? Like, I don't
Yes.
want, you know, like a mile loop in your backyard for 10 hours, you know, that you're not really excited on because we only have so much energy that we can give in a lifetime, in a year, in a training block, right? So it's like if you're going to put a B race on your calendar, like be stoked up on it, whether it's like for the competition or for it's for personal enjoyment or it's a race you've never done or a cool area that you want to go to. So I don't treat B races as like, oh, just sign up last minute and it'll be fine, right? You know, so um, I think
And then I
you know,
think when on the flip side, so you know what? I have a lot of athletes that like A, B, C races. They like to have a really full calendar because they love being at races. They love the community, and I think that that's amazing, right? That's not a problem. But then we have this other group of athletes. I fall into this category more that I don't do all of those races. You know, I like to personally pick a couple A races a year, and I very rarely race in between for one big reason is because I am the person that can't not race. So I know it's not smart for me to sign up for a race unless I'm actually planning on racing because I have a hard time holding back. Now for me, I think it's better for me to say I will pace a race. I'll pace a marathon because I can get that long run in and it's not at my race pace. And that is a way to monitor me from going too fast.
that is great. I love that, and I definitely identify as that type of athlete too. And coming into my as I'm spending my transition season thinking about where am I going to go for my next season, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to try as hard as I can to try to be more like that athlete who you know doesn't take every race so incredibly seriously. I kind a bit on the back end of this past year, just getting COVID right in the middle of when I had my two last races in October and November after not racing from June. And it made me realize, like, man, I miss being like at races and with the community. And, like, so now this next year, I have a lot more races lined up, and I have a couple ones that I'm going to go pretty hard on, but I have some other ones like, that I'm definitely going to try to keep more as training races, and just know that like, hey, it might not reflect it on my ultra sign up score or my ultra sign up ranking, but like, this is because I'm doing these races at the beginning of the year because I want to do X at Kettle Moraine this year,
Right. Yep.
things like that. And that's where, as I sign up for these races, I'm trying to, like, I'm making a pact with myself, like in transition season, like, okay, you can sign up for this one, but if you do, just know that, like, you gotta not race it so hard.
Yep, yep. And that's a hard thing, but a good thing to reflect on during transition season. For me, I've done some crewing and pacing recently, and I've learned this is a great way for me to be around the community, but not racing, which I still love that opportunity because you're right. It's so much fun to be in that atmosphere, but I know myself, and I would love to be able to be a person that could just go and have fun at a race and not race every race. So I think that's good.
Okay, kind of like in a tangent polar right now, because I'm just thinking to myself, like, let's say I love the Earth Day race and I want to go and be with the community at Earth Day race and I want to run. But do you have athletes who they will only sign up for the longest distance? They won't just say like, oh, I want to go to Earth Day and I want to like hang. And the reason why I pick Earth Day is because there's a 50K, there's a 15 mile, and there is a 5 mile, right? So have you ever had an athlete say, I really want to go to this race, but I think I'm just going to do the 15K instead of the 50K or the 50?
I think that's a really good question because I feel like people always gravitate to, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do the longest distance, whether it really makes sense in their training. It's just like, oh, I think we're just all drawn to, let's do the worst, hardest thing that we can. And so instead of thinking about logically, like, hey, I could still be at that race and I could do a shorter distance. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, for me, I'm like, yeah, you want to be a part of the race, you want to be a part of the day, you want to get your miles in, like, sign up for the 15 miler and then add like an extra 5 easy at the end, like to get your 20-mile long run in for the week. And if you go really hard at 15 miles, if you don't get injured, like it might be like 3 or 4 days of recovery, and then you're back at it. As opposed to the 50K, which might take you out for a week or two, if you're
Right.
racing. Um, Partly do.
What I find is that sometimes what happens is it doesn't fit into your race schedule so well, right? So now I want to all of a sudden do a 50K or a 50 mile in the midst of my build. And I really haven't been doing that many long runs to get me there. And so I think thinking about that is really good because otherwise you're always constantly in that high mileage trying to keep up with doing those longer distances. And then if you're not able to maintain that higher volume and then you do this high volume race, that's where we think about the risk of injury, I think. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think it comes down to like a training race is going to be different for everybody, right? Like if you routinely build yourself up to 15-mile long runs, and that's your typical long run, even in like a down week or whatever, maybe you're running high mileage, maybe you can go and run that like 20-mile trail race, pretty be like super setback in training, right? But
Right.
let's say
Definitely.
serious transition season, and now you have this race that's the first week of January, and you're like, oh, like it's been 2 months since I've done a run over 13 miles. It's probably not a safe idea that you do a 20-mile trail race, just because it's not your typical norm anymore. That is a race effort. Then, even if you don't run it hard, the fatigue that it puts on your body, because it's basically almost double your typical long run mileage. It still puts fatigue on your body that can then set you back for what would be your base build. Instead of building, you're going to be just like base racing and then just trying to recover and then starting to build instead of building from.
Yeah.
So
So much to think about, but it's exciting time of the year. I have athletes planning. Many of them have a full race schedule for 24. I have people that have races on the docks for 25 and even 26. So, when you're thinking about it, you can look at the small picture of, the training year. But then you can look at the next 3-5 years of like, do you have bucket lists? Do you have really big goals that you want to get to? And you know that you're going to be stepping up, slowly to get to that point of whatever it might be, like maybe it's the Triple Crown, maybe it's the Midwest Slam, those kind of bigger things that you're building up to and say, okay, I'm going to do that in 2026, so you can have these long range goals too. And I think it's nice to be able to have those and be able to build the shorter term goals to lead up to those big goals. Not a lot of people think that far out, but I do have several athletes that are planning that way. And I think I admire that.
That's right. And these transition seasons are the seasons with which you bridge your previous racing season with your next one in this never ending, hopefully, trajectory of our ultra running career. So, Loretta, do you have anything else to say about the transition season or building your seasons in general?
I don't think so. I think that really wraps it up. I guess the big thing is keep moving during your transition season so that you're ready for the next season. Really pick out some things that you feel like you could work on and make a difference for yourself as you move on into race season. Again, we have a great team of coaches that are here to help. So if you're thinking about it, this is a great time. We're picking up a whole lot of new athletes right now, getting ready for the 2024 season. We would love to be a part of it. So if you're interested, reach out to me at loretta.ornerymulracing@gmail.com, and I can get you set up with any of our coaches.
Beautiful. Thank you, Loretta. It's been 2 weeks, and I'm glad that we got back onto the podcast this week. Last Thursday was Thanksgiving, and it was great to be with family, but of course, I love Thursday mornings with you.
Me too. And I almost failed Michelle on this. Hennepin 100 registration is opening on Friday, so be ready to click register if that's the race that you're planning for this year.
All right, and with that,
Bye.
take care.
Bye.